So when we think about fine-tuning some of the business-related processes for a creative practice, I think there's three primary areas where we see clients not either putting enough intentional thought into how they do these things, or they simply haven't developed any structure about it at all, right? So it's either that it's not getting revised and revisited and tweaked often enough, or these are areas where everything is kind of treated as a one-off. There's an appeal or an allure to treating things that come up in your business as a one-off, especially when you're a creative or a designer, because you love solving problems and designing solutions. And so it can be very natural to fall into that pattern and look at every next thing as another little opportunity or challenge for something to solve. But the danger there, of course, is if you're putting all that energy into resolving all these business problems, like, for example, how to price your services, if you're rethinking that every time and redesigning it for that specific client or that specific project, that's more energy that you're not spending in either serving your clients or maybe growing your business and growing new opportunities, that kind of thing. So what we want to do is find ways to create some structure and systems and process for your creative practice and fine-tune it as you go. So here are three areas where I think there's the most opportunity for some improvement as they fine-tune. First is having a process for choosing your projects, choosing what projects you work on. And what I love about this is it's so broadly applicable to literally anybody from, a solo freelance director or photographer or sound designer, all the way up to $1 million plus marketing, branding agencies, firms, right? There's always a process for choosing whether I take on a job or not, or at least we hope there is. And when you look at that kind of decision, what I've found tends to make the most sense to creatives and creative business owners is to think of it as sort of a matrix, if you want to think of it that way, or just simply think of like a machine with three levers, right? Three levers that toggle up and down. And the first lever is money. So what is the budget for the project? How much money is this client able to put towards solving the problem? What could my potential fees be, right? That's the question. So money is the first lever. Time is the middle one. So when you think about time, this can kind of go on two dimensions, but is it time as in how urgent is the project? Like, do they need something immediately? Do they need me to drop everything else I'm doing and focus only on this? So is there urgency? And then the second part of time is also how much time is it going to take? If I take this project on, am I or my team, my people, going to be stuck working on this project for days, weeks, months? So somewhere there's a score of how much time is going to go into this, either how urgent or how long. Maybe you use both, okay? And then the third lever is looking at creative freedom. And creative freedom could mean that this is a project, if it scores kind of high on this scale, it would be a project where, for example, you have a great degree of creative flexibility. You can really flex your creativity in a way that you're going to find exciting, challenging. It might mean that you wind up with a great piece to put in your portfolio going forward, something you're really proud of, versus we all know as creative professionals, there's also projects you do sometimes where you know the work is just not going to be something that you're going to put in your portfolio. At the end of the day, it's not resembling your best work, but sometimes we got to do those too, right? Okay, so we know what these three levers are now. We have money, we have time, we have creative freedom. Somehow you have to score these three things, and usually you need at least two of the three to be at a high enough level in order for the job to make sense, right? So you can come up with your own kind of measure of scoring, like 1 to 10 on each of these three things. And probably two of the three of them need to be above, let's say 5. You can pick the levels that make sense for you in your scoring. But you got to have 2 out of these 3. In other words, it's okay to take on a project that's going to take a lot of time, right? If it scores low on the time lever, if the budget is strong and you have a good degree of creative control, right? Maybe you're willing to do that. Or maybe they don't have as much budget, so the money lever goes down, but the time is very flexible, it's not going to take too much, and you have a great degree of creative control, right? So it's kind of cool to think about those 3 levers as things that can interplay. You may have variation here and there, depending on what kinds of projects come your way, and then you get to decide across those 3 scales, where is the project doing well, where is it not, and what is our minimum threshold for these things to be met in order for us to say, yes, this is a project worth taking on. So important to fine-tune that as a business system and process, and to put it in place, and then, to reassess, do a semi-annual review. Look at all the projects you did over the last 6 months. Which ones did you love? And which ones felt great? Which ones were you, at the end of the day, really reluctant for, or just decide after doing it, hey, that's not the kind of stuff we want to keep doing. Go back, see how they scored, and see if you need to make some adjustments to that process, okay? Number 2, second big area of opportunity is not understanding your job profitability. So by that, I mean, not all jobs are created equal, even in the creative spectrum, right? So for any given project that you decide to take on, you have to understand how profitable are those opportunities. And for example, it's possible to have made more money on, let's say, projects that total $100,000 for the year if you have a 50% job profitability, right? That means your direct costs, the time, labor, materials, everything that goes into those projects is only half of those fees. So 50% of it is left to cover your salary and operating expenses. You could make more money doing $100,000 worth of work at a 50% margin, right, than if you did $200,000 of work at a 10% margin. So if your projects are only netting you, if an overwhelming majority of the cost is going right out the door to cover the project costs, and out of $200K in fees, 90% of it is going to cover costs, you're only left with 10%. You've done more work, right? You've done double the billings, double the fees. You might feel good about that number, but at the end of the day, if it only pocketed you 20 grand, you might have been better off doing $100,000 worth of work and pocketing 50K, right? That is the magic of understanding job profitability. And if you don't have a means of doing that yet, of tracking the different labor costs, direct cost and material kind of project expenses, we like to use a software tool called Xero with our clients. It's an cloud-based accounting app. And I would look at using something like Xero and using for example, their tracking categories as a way to tag all the expenses related to a specific project. They also do have a separate projects feature and an additional tool that you can use in an upgraded version of Xero. But even if you're using the sort of standard version, the tracking categories often, for a lot of folks, do a good enough job of letting you track project costing. So think about that. Make sure you understand how much each job is netting you in profit so that you can understand for yourself what does good look like and what are those projects that we're trying to find. And last but not least, third area to think about creating some fine-tuned business systems for your creative practice is productizing your services. So even the most creative, the most bespoke, unique sort of design practices can find ways to think about what they do, the services that they provide, in productized ways. And by that, I mean that you're not necessarily approaching every single project from scratch, as a blank canvas, that you know the kinds of services you provide, that maybe for each kind of service you have some parameters around it, like we do 3 days of discovery, we do 2 days of planning and prep back at our office, we do this many days of design work, right? And that process is defined. And by defining the process, it gives you two huge insights. Number one, it helps you understand your pricing better, right? You will not be starting from scratch or pulling a number out of thin air. Instead, you can base your pricing on the value that's created by all of these different components of your process, right? And then the second important one is it also helps you understand and prepare for your costs and prepare for your team needs, right? So if you know that every next job I take on is going to have, for this kind of service we do, this is the workload that's involved, this is the number of people I need for how many days, then you might see, I can't take on this project and start it this month because I already have people mapped out and they're at capacity, and I won't have enough people to really start this project the way that I want to do it until next month, right? You can know those things for yourself in advance, not get stuck in a pickle where you can't deliver what you've promised. Or on the flip side, you might see, hey, I have an opportunity to take on this project. I just need to find the people. So if I can find them and do it in a way that makes sense given my pricing, or maybe I need to tweak my pricing based on their urgency, right? If you go back and think about the first thing we talked about in project urgency, maybe I need to charge them an urgency additional fee so that I can help cover the cost of me going out and sourcing some last minute labor, right? But if you think about your services and the things you provide in your creative practice as a product, it's going to help you better understand how to price them, how to prepare and think about cost and your team needs. And frankly, it also really helps your clients come to the decision to work with you, because it's a lot easier for someone to wrap their head around a well-defined process, even if it's a creative kind of abstract design process, than it is to just say, hey, work with us, we're great, we'll solve your problem. People will have all kinds of questions like, well, what do you do when you solve our problem? How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? All these things, right? So you could answer all those questions for them ahead of time by creating these productized services. So those are your three main areas to tackle in your creative practice: how to choose what projects to work on, understanding your job profitability, and how to productize your services so that you can create consistent results and start to scale your practice. I hope that's helpful. And if you have any other questions, drop us a note.